The limo was gone. Not late. Gone. The spot where it was supposed to be parked, behind the church, engine running, white ribbons taped to the hood, was just an empty rectangle of wet asphalt. I stood there in my wedding dress, veil already pinned, holding my phone with 11 missed calls from my own mother, and I laughed. A short, ugly laugh that didn't sound like me at all. Because I already knew who had it. I didn't know why yet. I only knew that 20 minutes earlier, my best friend Jordan had been standing exactly where that car used to be, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching me through the church's side window like she was trying to memorize my face before something ended. She hadn't said a word to me all morning. That should have been my first clue. Jordan Reyes never went quiet. Not once in the 11 years I'd known her. She talked through movies, through funerals, through the 2 minutes of silence at my grandfather's memorial, leaning over to whisper something that made me choke back a laugh in the middle of grief because that was who she was, the person who filled every silence I was too scared to fill myself. So when she went quiet 3 days before my wedding, I told myself it was nothing. I was wrong. It was the loudest thing she'd ever done. My name is Dani Okafor. I was 28 years old, 40 minutes from marrying a man named Ryan Cole in front of 120 guests, a photographer I'd hired 8 months in advance, and my mother, who had already cried through her makeup twice. I loved Ryan. I want to be honest about that, because this isn't a story about a man who did something terrible. Ryan didn't do anything wrong. That's what made everything so much harder to explain, later, to people who wanted a villain. The only person who did something unforgivable that day was me. I just didn't know it yet. 3 weeks before the wedding, Jordan started canceling on me. Small things at first. She skipped the final dress fitting, texted that she had a work deadline. She missed the bachelorette dinner planning call, said her phone died. She used to be the one organizing everything, color-coded spreadsheets, group chats with too many exclamation points. Then suddenly she was the one falling off the map. I remember sitting in my apartment on a Tuesday night, staring at our last text exchange, which had gone from her usual paragraphs down to single words. Sounds good. Okay, sure. I typed "Are you mad at me?" and deleted it 4 times before I finally sent it. She didn't respond for 6 hours. When she did, it was one line. Why would I be mad at you? Not a question. A period where a question mark should have been. I read it maybe 10 times that night, lying on my back in the dark, my engagement ring catching the streetlight through the blinds, and I felt something twist low in my stomach that I didn't have a name for yet. I told myself it was wedding stress. Everyone said maid of honor duties were exhausting. I told myself that so many times it almost worked. Here's what I didn't know at the time. 2 weeks before that text, Jordan had been sitting in her car outside a jewelry store, holding a small velvet box she never gave me, staring at her own reflection in the rearview mirror, asking herself out loud whether she was about to ruin the best friendship of her life or save it. She put the box in her glove compartment and drove home without going inside. I only found out about that box much later. But when I finally understood what it meant, I understood everything else too. Jordan and I met in a college dorm hallway when we were 19, both trying to shove oversized suitcases through doors too narrow for them, both cursing under our breath at the exact same moment. She looked at me and said, "This building hates women," and I laughed so hard I dropped my suitcase on my own foot. We were inseparable after that. Different in almost every way that mattered. I was the one who color-coded my class notes and panicked over B+s. Jordan skated through with natural charm and a memory like a steel trap, the kind of person who could talk her way out of a parking ticket and somehow leave the cop smiling. I was quiet in rooms full of strangers. Jordan owned every room she walked into. People used to ask how we were friends at all. The truth is, Jordan was the only person who ever made me feel like I didn't need to perform. Around everyone else, I managed myself carefully, watched my tone, softened my opinions, made sure I was easy to be around. Around Jordan, I could be tired, or petty, or wrong, and she never once made me feel smaller for it. I didn't understand, for most of those 11 years, that what I felt for her sat somewhere outside the shape of ordinary friendship. I only knew that when good things happened to me, she was the first person I wanted to tell. And when bad things happened, she was the only person whose voice actually made the bad thing smaller. I met Ryan in my second year of grad school. He was steady in a way I found restful after years of chasing people who kept me guessing. He remembered how I took my coffee. He showed up on time. He never made me feel like I was too much or not enough, and after a string of relationships that left me exhausted, restful felt like love. Jordan liked him, or she said she did. She came to every dinner, laughed at his jokes, helped me pick out my dress. When he proposed at my sister's engagement party, on a balcony overlooking the city, Jordan was the one who screamed loud enough that 3 tables turned around. She hugged me so tightly I felt her hands shaking against my back. At the time I thought it was excitement. I didn't know what she had already decided that night, standing on that balcony behind me, watching me say yes to someone else. I didn't know she'd gone home, sat on her bathroom floor, and cried in a way she never let anyone see. I only found that out from her sister, months later, in a conversation I wasn't supposed to overhear. The wedding planning brought us closer in some ways and further apart in others. Jordan threw herself into logistics, the seating chart, the florist, the playlist, like if she just stayed busy enough she wouldn't have to feel anything underneath it. For a while it worked. We spent hours on video calls comparing centerpiece photos, and it almost felt normal again. Then, one night in April, everything cracked open just slightly, enough for me to see something underneath that I wasn't ready to look at directly. We were at my apartment, both a little drunk on cheap wine, going through my mother's old wedding photos for inspiration. Jordan was quiet, scrolling through pictures of my parents young and laughing, and then she said, out of nowhere, "Do you ever wonder if you're marrying him because it's easy, or because it's right?" I laughed it off. Said something about how marriage isn't supposed to be hard from day one. She didn't laugh back. She just looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look that lasted half a second too long to be casual, and said, "I just want you to be sure." That's all. I asked her if she was okay. She said she was fine, topped off her wine, and changed the subject to bridesmaid dress colors like nothing had happened. I let her. That was easier than asking the real question sitting underneath hers. That night, after she left, I sat on my couch for a long time, replaying the way she'd looked at me. I told myself I was imagining things. I had a wedding to plan, a job I loved, a fiancé who adored me. There was no room in that life for the strange, warm, uncomfortable feeling sitting in my chest when I thought about the way Jordan's voice had cracked slightly on the word right. I didn't call her back that night. I wish I had. The bachelorette weekend was where the second hook of this story really opens, the moment where I started to understand that something was being hidden from me, even if I didn't yet understand what. We rented a lake house 2 hours outside the city, 7 of us, wine and bad karaoke and inside jokes going back a decade. Jordan organized every detail, as usual, but she drank more than I'd ever seen her drink, and by midnight on the second night, most of the group had gone to bed, and it was just the 2 of us on the dock, feet in the cold water, stars overhead. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, almost too soft to hear over the water, "Can I tell you something and you promise not to make it weird?" My heart did something strange. I said of course. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Then she said, "I don't think I've ever told you how much you changed my life." That's it. That's all I wanted to say. It wasn't what she meant to say. I know that now. I could see it in her face, the way her jaw tightened right after, like she'd swallowed the real sentence at the last second and replaced it with a safer one. I hugged her. She held on longer than usual, her hand pressed flat against my back, and when we pulled apart, her eyes were wet. Bachelorette weekend jitters, I told myself. Nothing more. 3 days later, she started canceling on me. I want to slow down here, because this is where the story most people expect me to skip past, and it's the part that actually matters most. 2 weeks before the wedding, I found out, through a mutual friend, that Jordan had gone on exactly 1 date since college. 1. In 6 years. Every time someone tried to set her up, she had an excuse ready. Too busy, not interested, focused on her career. I never questioned it before. I do now, looking back, because I understand what she was protecting herself from. Jordan had known she was gay since she was 17 years old, and she had told exactly 2 people in her entire life. Her sister, and a therapist she saw for 8 months in her early 20s before she decided it was easier to stop going than to keep confronting what therapy kept circling back to. She never told me, not because she didn't trust me, because telling me meant admitting, even just to herself, why it was so hard to say out loud in the first place. I found all of this out too late to change anything, and too early to pretend I didn't know. The week of the wedding, my mother mentioned, almost in passing, that Jordan had asked her a strange question at the final dress fitting. She asked if I seemed happy. Really happy, not wedding happy, life happy. My mother laughed it off as pre-wedding nerves on Jordan's part. I laughed it off too, when she told me. I keep thinking about how many times I laughed things off that spring. How many small alarms I heard and quietly turned down because a bigger, louder plan was already in motion and I didn't want to be the one who stopped it. 2 nights before the wedding, Jordan showed up at my apartment unannounced. I hadn't seen her in 5 days, our longest stretch of silence in a decade of friendship. She looked different, thinner around the eyes, like she hadn't slept. She stood in my doorway for a moment before she came in, and when she finally spoke, her voice was steady in a way that scared me more than if she'd been upset. She said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen before you say anything." I sat down on my couch. She stayed standing, arms crossed, like she needed the distance to get the words out. She said, "I've been trying to figure out how to say this for 2 years, and I know the timing is unforgivable, and I'm not trying to ruin your wedding. I would never do that to you, but I can't watch you marry him without you knowing the truth, even if it changes nothing." My stomach dropped somewhere I didn't have a name for. I asked her what truth. She looked at me for a long time. Long enough that the silence itself became an answer. Then she said, "I'm in love with you. I have been for years. I didn't want to be. I tried everything not to be. And I know you're marrying Ryan in 2 days, and I know this doesn't change that, and I'm not asking you to do anything with it. I just couldn't let you stand at that altar without knowing there was someone in the room who loved you in a way you never let yourself see." I didn't say anything for what felt like a very long time. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't shock. That's the part that terrified me most. Somewhere underneath the panic and the guilt and the immediate reflexive thought of Ryan's face, there was something else. A kind of recognition, like a word I'd known my whole life but never said out loud, finally spoken by someone else's mouth. I told her I needed her to leave. She did, without arguing, without trying to convince me of anything. She just picked up her jacket, said "I'm sorry," and walked out the door, and I sat on my couch for 3 hours afterward without moving, staring at nothing, my phone buzzing with wedding logistics texts I didn't answer. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed running through 11 years of memories with new eyes, the balcony hug that lasted too long, the doc conversation she couldn't finish, the question about whether marrying someone because it's easy is the same as marrying someone because it's right. By morning I had convinced myself it didn't matter. I was getting married in 24 hours. Jordan's feelings, whatever they were, however long they'd existed, were not my responsibility to solve 2 days before my wedding. I told myself I could grieve the friendship later, carefully, quietly, without blowing up my entire life in the process. I called Ryan that morning and told him nothing was wrong. I told my mother the same thing. I put on a version of myself I'd been practicing for years, the one who stayed calm, who didn't make waves, who kept everyone else comfortable even when she wasn't. Jordan texted me once, the morning of the wedding. 3 words, "I'll still come." I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. Some small, cowardly part of me was relieved she was still coming, because it meant I wouldn't have to explain her absence to 120 guests. A larger part of me was terrified of seeing her face across the room while I said vows to someone else. I got to the church at 10 in the morning. Jordan arrived at 10:30, in the pale green bridesmaid dress we'd picked out together 6 months earlier, and she didn't look at me once during hair and makeup. She stood by the window instead, arms crossed, watching the parking lot like she was waiting for something. At 11:15, I asked one of the other bridesmaids where she'd gone. Nobody had seen her leave. At 11:40, someone came in to say the limo was missing from the back lot. I already knew. I walked outside in my wedding dress, veil pinned, my mother calling my name behind me, and I stood in the empty parking spot where the car used to be, and for the first time in 2 days, I let myself feel the full weight of what I'd been avoiding. My phone buzzed. A text from Jordan. No explanation. Just an address, 20 minutes away, and one line. Underneath it, "If you want to marry him, I'll bring the car back right now. I just needed you to have 30 minutes to actually decide, instead of getting swept into it because it was already moving." I stood there in the parking lot, guests starting to whisper behind the church doors, my mother's voice rising in panic somewhere behind me, and I felt something in my chest crack open completely. Because here is the thing nobody tells you about the moment before you understand your own life. It doesn't feel like clarity. It feels like falling. I thought about Ryan's face, how kind it was, how safe I'd always felt beside him. I thought about the life we'd planned, the apartment we'd already picked out, the version of my future that had felt so solid a week ago I could have drawn a map of it. Then I thought about 11 years of Jordan showing up. The hospital waiting room when my father had his surgery, when she sat beside me for 6 hours without once checking her phone. The nights she drove 90 minutes to bring me soup when I was too sick to leave my apartment. The way she remembered things about me that I'd forgotten about myself. I thought about the word right, the way her voice had cracked on it in April, and I finally understood what she'd really been asking me that night, underneath the wine and the old photographs. Not whether Ryan was right for me. Whether I even knew what right was supposed to feel like, because I'd never let myself feel it toward the person who actually made me feel it. I called a rideshare app on my phone, told the driver an address I'd gotten off a text message, and I got into the back seat in my wedding dress, my mother's voice fading behind me as the church doors closed, my bridesmaids staring after me in stunned silence. I want to pause here and say something honest. I know how this looks from the outside. I know it looks like a woman abandoning a good man at the altar for a whim, a moment of panic dressed up as clarity. It wasn't a whim. It was the first honest decision I'd made in 2 years. The address led to a small overlook off the highway, a place Jordan and I used to drive to in college when neither of us could sleep, when the world felt too loud and we needed somewhere quiet to sit and not talk for a while. The limo was parked at an angle, ribbons still taped crookedly to the hood, and Jordan was sitting on the hood itself, still in her bridesmaid dress, staring out at the view like she'd been crying and trying to stop. She heard my car door close and turned around. Her face did something complicated when she saw me, hope and fear fighting for the same space. She said, "You're supposed to be getting married right now." I said, "I know." She stood up slowly, hands shaking slightly at her sides. She said, "Dani, if you came here to yell at me, I understand. I know I did something completely insane. I know I might have just ruined the most important day of your life, and I would understand if you never." I closed the distance between us before she could finish the sentence. I didn't have a speech prepared. I hadn't planned any of this, not the ride, not the words, not the decision itself, because the truth is I hadn't fully made the decision until I was standing in front of her, close enough to see her hands were shaking. I said, "I've spent 2 years convincing myself that comfortable and right were the same thing. And I think some part of me has known for a long time that they weren't, and I just didn't have the courage to look at it directly, because looking at it meant admitting I was about to build a whole life on the wrong foundation." Jordan didn't say anything. She just watched me, like she was afraid that if she spoke, she'd break whatever was happening. I said, "I'm not marrying Ryan today. I don't know what happens after this. I don't know if this is a mess I can even fix, or if I've just destroyed 120 people's afternoon and one very good man's trust in me. But I know that when you told me the truth 2 nights ago, some part of me had been waiting my whole life to hear it, even though I didn't understand that until right now." Jordan's face crumpled slightly, the way faces do right before real tears, not performed ones. She said, "I need you to be sure. I can't be the reason you blow up your whole life if this isn't real for you. I'd rather love you quietly forever than watch you regret this." I told her the truth, the plainest version of it I had. I said I didn't know everything yet. I didn't know how to undo a wedding, or what I'd say to my mother, or how long it would take Ryan to forgive me, if he ever did. But I knew, standing on that overlook in a dress that wasn't meant for this moment, that I wasn't scared of her. I had never once, in 11 years, been scared of Jordan. I had spent 2 years being scared of a future that felt safe but empty. And I had spent one afternoon more certain than I'd ever been about anything, standing in front of the one person who had never once asked me to be smaller than I was. She reached out and took my hand, the same way she had 100 times before as just a friend, except this time neither of us let go out of habit or fear. We stood there for a long time, not saying much, the wind pulling strands of hair loose from my carefully pinned veil, the limo's ribbons fluttering against the hood behind us. I'm not going to pretend what came after was simple. I owed Ryan a conversation he deserved to have in person, not through a text or a rumor spreading through a stunned wedding crowd. I drove back to the church that evening, out of the dress, in jeans and a borrowed jacket, and I sat with him for 2 hours in his car in an empty parking lot while he asked me every question a person deserves to ask when the life he thought he was building disappears in an afternoon. He was angry. He had every right to be. But underneath the anger, there was something else, something almost like relief, because he admitted, quietly, near the end of that conversation, that he'd felt something missing between us for months too, something he hadn't let himself name because the wedding train was already moving too fast to stop and question it. We didn't stay friends right away. Some wounds need distance before they can become anything else. But 6 months later, he sent me a message wishing me well, and I believed he meant it, because by then he was seeing someone new, someone he later told me made him feel the thing he'd been quietly missing with me the whole time. My mother took longer. There were hard conversations, some of them ugly, some of them full of things I wish neither of us had said. But my mother had spent 30 years married to my father, and somewhere in the middle of her anger, she looked at me one evening and asked if I was happy, actually happy, not performing happy. I told her yes, for the first time in longer than I could remember. She didn't say much after that. But 3 weeks later, she showed up at Jordan's apartment with a container of jollof rice and sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours, and I watched my mother slowly, carefully, begin to let go of the version of my life she'd imagined, to make room for the one I actually wanted. Jordan and I didn't rush anything after that day at the Overlook. We'd spent 11 years building something real, and neither of us wanted to burn it down by moving too fast in the wrong direction now that we finally had the chance to move in the right one. We started slow. Dinners that used to feel like friendship now carried a different kind of quiet underneath them. The first time she reached for my hand across a restaurant table, in public, without checking who was watching first, I felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't even realized had been unsettled my entire life. 6 months after the wedding that never happened, we moved into a small apartment together, the kind with 2 little closet space and a radiator that clanked all winter, and neither of us cared, because for the first time, I understood what my mother's old wedding photos had actually been trying to tell me. Not that love looked a certain way. That it felt a certain way. Easy in the moments that mattered and hard in the moments that were worth fighting for, but never, not once, something you had to talk yourself into. A year to the day after the wedding that didn't happen, Jordan took me back to that same overlook off the highway, no limo this time, just her car and a blanket in the trunk and a small velvet box she'd been carrying around, it turned out, for almost 2 years, long before either of us had the courage to say anything true out loud. She didn't give some big speech. That was never her style, not when it counted most. She just sat beside me on the hood of her car, took my hand the way she had 100 times before, and said, "I spent 2 years being terrified of ruining the best thing in my life by wanting more of it. I don't want to be terrified anymore." I said yes before she even finished asking. We got married the following spring, in a small backyard ceremony with 40 guests instead of 120, no limo, just a walk down a grass aisle in shoes that got a little muddy at the edges. My mother cried through her makeup exactly twice, the same as she had a year before, except this time every tear was the good kind. Ryan sent a card. Inside, he'd written just one line. "I'm glad you finally got to marry the right person." I keep that card in a drawer, and every so often I take it out and remember how close I came to spending my whole life comfortable, instead of finally letting myself be happy. People ask me sometimes if I regret how it happened, the missing limo, the runaway bride headline my cousin posted online before I'd even had the chance to explain myself to my own grandmother. I tell them the truth. I don't regret a single second of that chaos, because it was the first time in my adult life I chose the truth over the plan. Jordan likes to joke that she committed grand theft limo to save our relationship, and I remind her every time that she didn't steal anything. She just gave me 30 minutes of silence, in a life that had been too loud and too fast for 2 years, long enough for me to finally hear what I actually wanted. I used to think love was supposed to feel like certainty from the very beginning, clean and obvious and easy to explain to other people. I know now that sometimes it looks like confusion first. Like a hand held under a table and pulled away too fast. Like a friend who goes quiet right when you need her voice the most. Like a question you're too afraid to ask, sitting right there in front of you for years, waiting patiently for you to finally be brave enough to answer it honestly. The limo sat outside that overlook for 4 hours that afternoon, ribbons still taped crookedly to the hood, engine ticking as it cooled in the evening air, while 120 guests slowly went home from a wedding that never happened. And somewhere off a quiet highway, in a dress that was never meant for this moment, I finally stopped running toward the life I was supposed to want, and started walking, slowly, honestly, toward the one that had been waiting for me the whole time. This has been an original fictional LGBTQ love story, written for LGBTQ Untold Stories. If this story moved you, stay with us for more.